Okay, welcome to tonight's ATM, Monday, May, what is today, the 17th. So we are going to do one of what Feldenkrais practitioners or Moshe would call a classic ATM, as if there's classic ATMs, but there really is. There's sort of a family of ATMs. Feldenkrais wrote a book called Awareness Through Movement, and in that, there's some principles in the first half of the book, and the second half of the book is written out instructions for 10 ATMs, which he calls foundational or classic ATMs. And together they sort of cover the really basic primal foundational movement patterns of the human structure. And then all the other ATMs sort of are tributaries off of those. And so this ATM is actually one of my most favorite ATMs. It's a really gentle, for me, it's a very nourishing feeling kind of ATM. So you're going to be on your side. You want to have either a pillow or maybe a pillow and a towel or a folded up blanket, something that will be thick enough. Yeah, it might not be enough. It might not be enough. It needs to be thick enough so that when you lay on your side, your head doesn't hang down or get propped up. Your head's at the level of your spine. Because I don't want you to have your arm underneath your head for this lesson. Yeah, so between those things, you ought to have enough. And the same for you. That's probably enough. Yeah. Okay, so this lesson is going to be done lying on both sides. So as I just said, the reason to have the thing under your head is so that your head is just really an extension of your spine. It's not cocked up and it's not hanging down. Okay, so for anybody else that might be listening to this, that's the strategy that we're looking for. So go ahead and bring yourself up to standing and come off of your mat and settle into your contact with the floor as it is and sense what you sense about how you come to this moment. So just let your hands be at your side. Your legs are just a comfortable distance apart, not wide, not narrow, which is an interesting thing. If they weren't there, right? If you had them more narrow or more wide, it's not anything that you're doing wrong, but you just observe sort of the default of where your system lands. And sometimes that default is different based upon, well, not sometimes, almost all the time, based upon what your sort of emotional state is, right? If you feel like you had to just, go through a whole bunch, maybe you stand with a wider stance, or if you feel sort of a little bit more, hanging back, maybe you end up with a narrower stance. It's just an interesting thing to notice this default pattern. And it relates to this discussion that we were having before, which is how the system will naturally move towards more efficiency when you study the differences between more and less efficient movement patterns. So here you are standing, and there's a relationship between each foot to the ground. But of course, it's bigger than just the footprint, right? Like if you were to put ink on your foot and mark it on a piece of paper, it's not just the footprint, because that footprint is indicative of all the other parts, the leg, the pelvis, the trunk, the angles of the pelvis, the ribs, the head. So a lot of these lessons that we've done so far in this series is about sort of where your head and your pelvis and your trunk are relative to each other. It's also the ease in the knees and the ankles. And it's also how you receive ground force coming up through you. And it's kind of one of these funny forces that it's there all the time and you're receiving it, but we don't walk around thinking about it. But it has something to do with sort of like if you work a little bit just to let your knees and ankles soften, just like you're going to do just like this tiniest little baby squat. And then you come back up, but you don't lift your heels, right? And you don't lock your knees. You sort of do a little baby squat and then come out of the little baby squat, but not overcome out of it, right? And it's like a carousel horse or something, but it's a little itty bitty version of it. And you just sense like how much give is there in the ankles, the knees, even the feet, the hips, the trunk. And the further you get away from the ground, often it's harder to sense that, right? Like if you go up and down, do you sense any kind of tension that goes on at the base of your neck or your skull or your jaw? Think of the lessons that we've done a few weeks ago. Do you feel that there's some kind of way that you squeeze unnecessarily someplace deep in the pelvic floor or in the hip joints? And what do you do with your trunk? Does your pelvis or your trunk tip a little bit? And so we know there's 3 planes, right? So it could tip forward and back. It could tip side to side. And it could tip up relatively towards the ceiling and down relatively towards the floor, right? Those are the 6 directions or 3 cardinal planes of action. So this lesson tonight is going to explore really specifically that relationship between hip, shoulder, and rib cage in these 3 cardinal planes. So just the tiniest bit, slowly, just begin to shift your weight towards one side. Don't think, just go over there and then come back. Now just go to that one side. Don't go to the other side. A few times, go to the same side, but go really slow and feel the whole time you're shifting over there, is it reversible? Meaning that if you're going to your right side, at any point that you're going to your right side, could you reverse and come back to the center without having to push hard into the ground or squeeze something? Whichever side you're going to, is it reversible throughout the movement? So that means you have to unattach to any goal, right? It's not like I'm going to get over there and then I can go back. And you just notice, like, is something ahead or behind something else? Meaning, does your pelvis get ahead of your shoulders or your head, or does something lag behind? And it's a funny question, but how do you know it? You come back and rest. Now, if you've done that 5, 6, 7, 8 times, right? Each time your system is able to hone and notice something more specific. And now you come back to the center and stand on both feet. And possibly some parts of you may be more in your awareness than others than it was a minute ago. So now very slowly, gradually shift to the other side. Did you choose the easier one first? Did you choose the one where more of you is in coordination with more of you? So now you're only going to go to the other side. That's it. And then just back to the center, not past to the center. Beautiful. That's it. And you just notice, like, do you travel through more space, less space? Do you take a slightly different angle? And the funny thing is to shift to the side, to either side, doesn't matter. The system doesn't just go to the side, does it? Notice how it wobbles a little bit. It kind of goes forwards and back a little bit. And is there any up and down? Like if somebody had a ruler across the top of your head, would your head be moving in space towards the ceiling a little bit more or towards the floor a little bit more? There's nothing right or wrong about it. Just observe. Okay, now go take a walk for a second. And observe so you just shifted your weight from one side to the other, which is exactly what you're still doing when you walk. Can you feel the pattern of the weight shifting when you're standing in place inside of the weight shifting of gait? Now, it's not so easy to do because things switch so quickly during walking, right? You shift your weight and immediately you're shifting your weight again. And you can't hold on to the sense. It's there and it's gone and it comes back again. But you know enough about having attended to walking that it's highly likely that if there's a habit, what you do in standing in place, you probably do something similar when you walk. Like if you tend to fall down towards one side, do you do that when you walk, similar to what you did in standing, or is it different? So it has something to do with the pelvis as it can tip up and down, and how the shoulders and pelvis relate to each other. Okay, so come to lie on your back, and yeah, have your feet facing towards the computer like we have been. Yep. That's it. Great. And check in for a second and notice how you lie on your back. Let your arms down at your side. And observe the relationship that you make to the floor. So it's a similar thing we were noticing in standing. It's not just the footprint on the floor. So here, it's not just the body print on the floor, all the places where you're making contact, but it's this funny sort of invisible, but not completely invisible sense of how you feel the ground come up underneath of you. So if you're joining us, turn your mat just the tiniest bit of an angle. We're going to do a side lying lesson. I want to be able to see you, not exactly straight on, but that's perfect. And then have it be far enough away from you that I can see you. And so, or you might tilt down your computer. And observe what we noticed in standing. So we just attended to weight shifting side to side in standing, and we were noticing, do you tend to sort of drop down on one side, or lift up, or turn? When you shifted the weight to the right, what did you do in the trunk? And can you feel any remnants of that tendency while you're lying? So notice in particular the space between your right elbow and your right side, and your left elbow and your left side. Now, it's a funny thing, that space says something about the landing pattern of where your trunk lands, right? And the word trunk encompasses like a whole bunch of things, right? A whole bunch of ribs, a sternum, a whole bunch of vertebrae, the shoulder blades, the collarbones, right? That word trunk encompasses all kinds of things. So this space between your arm and your side says something about where your trunk lands, where your arms land, and where your pelvis lands. So it's not like a simple thing, right? If your pelvis was shifted a little bit this way or that way, it would feel different. If your arms were turned or laid out or in more, they would feel differently. So your side is really a complex thing. And if you observe your breathing just as it is, without trying to do anything to change it, how much, with a normal size inhale, right? Don't try to make a big one. With a normal size inhale, how much sense do you have that the space between your elbow and your side changes during either inhale or exhale? So don't try to make your sides expand, but just notice. Like, do you naturally fill into that part of your side of your trunk more on one side than the other? And how does that relate to which leg it was easier for you to shift onto in our check-in initially? Gently roll your head from side to side and observe how you attend to your whole self as your head is turning right. That's nice, beautiful, just nice and slow. And how you attend to your whole self when your head is turning left. And to be really honest, do you attend to your whole self, or do you just get caught up in how much can my neck turn? See, if the head is turning relatively to the left, one side of the trunk is being asked to be slightly more concave and the other slightly more convex. And if the head is turning to the right, right? Whichever way it's turning, something is being invited in the trunk. And if you don't sense that, it's not that you're doing something wrong. It's the foundation for observing what tendencies are present. Nothing can change until we know where we are to start out with. So now let your head rest and observe. If not thought about, right, and pre-decided, if just observed, which side would you roll to? If something quick happened and your system moved, would it roll to the right or to the left? Without thinking, it just goes that way. If it's an exact tie, then fine. But for most people, it's not. So let's have everyone roll to your right side. Now you're going to need something under your head. So if you just joined us, get a blanket or towel, and now place what you have so that it's firm enough on the bottom and soft enough on the top. If you have to fold something over, so that your head is a extension directly of your spine. Now, it sounds like such a simple thing, but it's not so simple to determine, right? If you come to lay there and you begin to sense where the top of the base of your neck, right? That's the top of your thoracic spine, or the bottom of your cervical spine, those big vertebrae that stick out on the base of the neck. And then the cervical vertebrae extend past that in the head. And you just observe, like, when I just rest as I do, is my head cocked up a little bit or cocked down a little bit? Or is it directly in line with my spine? So if you need to fold something, and if as we're doing this lesson, you feel like you need to adjust, fine. Roll something up, take something out, you can change it. And you just use your inner sensation to refine and nuance that. Knees are bent at a comfortably right angle. Well, this is a classic ATM. It's actually one of my favorites. Notice how you lie on your right side. And without fixing, correcting, or changing anything, observe, do you lie on your right side, or do you actually roll a little bit forwards or backwards? It's totally fine, just observe. If you have an inner sense that you're rolling forwards or rolling backwards, how do you know that? Do you know it by where the contact is on the ground, or do you know it by the left side that's not on the ground, or some combination of both? And possibly it could be that you have a sense that part of you is rolling forwards and part of you is rolling backwards. So side lying inherently is an asymmetrical position, right? It's just like the reference movement we did in the beginning of standing and shifting your weight to one side. Standing and shifting your weight to the right side is an asymmetrical position, right? You're not doing the same thing on the two sides. Asymmetrical positions are not bad or wrong. It just means that the two sides are doing different things. In order for them to be efficient, the two different things have to be done in a synchronous, counterbalancing kind of way. So side lying is one of those. Its gravity is now pushing directly down, right, through your left shoulder and trunk and pelvis and side of your head. And the ground force is pushing up. And so inherently, the weight-bearing side is asked to be more convex. And the non-weight-bearing side, or the supported side, your left side, is asked to be more concave. It doesn't mean you should squeeze and try to hold it, but just observe where you go into the ground and where you don't. And where you go into the ground is going to have an influence on the left side that's not on the ground. So let your left arm rest over your pelvis. It sort of drapes along your side and drapes along your pelvis, or your upper thigh, wherever it rests. And begin. So the arm is lazy in this lesson. Okay, so you're not going to initiate movement with your arm. It doesn't mean your arm won't move, but it's relatively lazy. And so find your left shoulder blade in your inner awareness, okay, wherever you locate it, okay. It's like about the size of a hand, and you could think about the size of a hand on the back side of you. It's not shaped exactly like a hand, but it's about that size. And so move your shoulder blade in a direction that it would move in a sort of directly up direction towards your ear or towards your head. Now, of course, your shoulder blade is attached to your clavicle and it moves along your rib cage. So when you move your shoulder blade, and it's also attached to your humerus, right? So it's going to pull your arm with it, and it's going to have an influence on your trunk. So there's a scapular clock similar to a pelvic clock, right? And we've done some portions of the pelvic clock. So if you thought about a clock dial, the scapula or shoulder would be sliding up directly at 12 o'clock. So you slide it up towards your ear or the side of your head. And you just find out, like, how much tension is there to just do this thing. It's not a big movement. It's not to squeeze and try to contract something. It's not to get it to be straight, but you just observe, like, how much tension is there to actively slide your shoulder up. Most people slide their shoulder up without any awareness a huge amount of the time, right? But they don't know that they're doing it. And then now slide your scapula down. Now, of course, your it's not that you're reaching down with your arm. Okay, you're sliding your scapula down, but your arm's going to be impacted. So your arm is like a secondary mover. It's not the primary mover. The scapula is the primary mover, but it's attached to the humerus. So it's going to pull the arm with it. So it's like 6 o'clock, right? So slide the scapula between 12 and 6 o'clock. And you find out that it's really not directly 12 and 6, right? It might waver a little to a minute before or a minute after, or 2 minutes before, 2 minutes after. And just feel that wavering. And see if you can help smooth it out through sensing how the contact on the right side has to change through the course of the action, right? And you just observe. It's when you really attend to this, you find out, wow, it's not just my left scapula that's moving. I have to do something through my pelvis and my legs, up through my head. And how smooth can I have this action be? The elbow and the arm do move, but secondarily, that's it. Can you reduce tension every place and have it be more fluid and smooth? That's it. And then rest. Just rest on your side. Now, come back and repeat the same 12 and 6 movement, initiating with the left scapula, and sense your rib cage on both sides. So when the scapula slides up towards 12 o'clock, what happens to the rib cage? Particularly that lower rib cage on the left side and the lower rib cage on the right side. And when the scapula slides down, what happens? It's kind of hard to notice both of them at the same time. So usually you have to do the movement a few times, noticing one side, and then a few times noticing the other side. Good. Rest for a second. Now, staying on your side, initiate now with your pelvis a similar kind of 12 and 6 o'clock movement. So take your left pelvis and initiate with the left pelvis. Now, again, the pelvis is connected to the femur. So when your pelvis moves, your leg is going to move, but you're not initiating the movement with your leg. It's like people would say, I'm going to hike my hip, right? So can you slide your pelvis up in the direction of your ear? Right? It's not trying to touch your ear, but it's going in that direction, directly up towards 12 o'clock. And that's a funny action. It's like a pumping kind of an action, right? Your arm is soft. You're initiating with your pelvis. up towards 12. And of course, it's impacting really all of you, correct? Like really a 10. The pelvis is a big part of our mass, and whenever we move it, it makes everything have some cascade reaction. And then press the pelvis down away from you towards 6 o'clock. And it's probably more apparent when you slide the pelvis up and down from 12 to 6 in this plane. It's not the same 12 to 6 as the pelvic clock when we lie on the back. But when you slide the pelvis up towards the head and down towards the wall at your feet, it's probably more impactful and easier to sense that it has an impact on your rib cage, those middle ribs, right? When the pelvis pushes away from you, can you sense that you have to switch and become concave on the weight-bearing side? And when the pelvis slides up, you have to become convex on the right side. So can you press into the ground as the pelvis slides up? And can you find a way to help come away from the ground on the right side to enable the left? And can you do that not ballistically? Now your arm is not dead, right? It's not inert. It's not initiating anything, but it's free to cooperate. That's it. Okay, so you just rest. And so it can generate this type of a piston kind of a feeling, right? Take both your pelvis and your shoulder and your scapula and initiate sliding both of them up towards your ear together. And then both of them down. And see if they can go at the same speed and the same time. Now, they're not the same size. Yeah, but notice if they can coordinate. So the whole left side slides up, and then the scapula and pelvis, the whole left side slides down. Of course, it has an impact on the right side. How smooth can it be? And now when you move a bigger part of your mass like this, can you notice if you tend to roll? Do you go forwards or backwards as you do it? Don't try to stop it or fix it. There's nothing wrong with it. I just want you to observe. That's it. And can it happen so that the movement can come up through your head nice and free? And can it go down through your feet nice and free? It's like a sideways carousel horse, right? Okay. Now rest on your side for a moment. Just sense your breathing. And then come on your back and take a full rest. Observe your contact with the ground. It's very interesting, this type of a lesson, because it's such a foundational movement. Like, I just think of a baby and they sort of do this rocking thing, like from a very early on age. It's really primal to let this sort of globality of the structure. You also see it with people with neurological injuries, right? Somebody that's had a significant stroke or some other head injury. And there's a way that the system uses this rocking rhythmical thing in order to help reduce excessive tone in the body. And the truth is we have initiated movement with one side, but we haven't just done one side, right? Like that's the common word. Like we need to roll over and do the other side, right? But it's not. You're doing an action in your whole structure. Now, it doesn't have the same impact, right? It can have different impact, but that's not really the right word. You're not asking the two sides to do the same thing. So observe, Like, does one side feel longer or heavier, or somehow that space between the elbow and the side somehow different? And forget the mind, because it's nothing that's supposed to happen. So if the mind says, well, it should feel like this, just notice what it does feel like. But it is interesting. Do you feel more in the side you initiated movement, the left side, or do you feel more in the weight bearing side, the right side? And just sense your breath expansion out to the sides and how it might be different. Sense if one leg or one arm feels longer or shorter than the other. Now, very gently, come back and roll to your right side again. Always check in with the thing that you have underneath your head. Check in and don't assume that the amount that you had before is going to be the amount you need now. You might need more, you might need less, or you might need to roll it slightly differently, right? The question is, can I bring the supporting ground through the pillow to meet me where I am? And where I am might not be the same as where I was when I first laid down. This is the hardest thing for Western minds to understand. Is like, once we do something, then we think, well, it's going to always be like that from now on, right? But it's not. We're a dynamic process. And you just observe. Am I rolled more this way or that? Do I have contact more or less in different parts of myself? How do I land? The knees are bent at about a right angle, and the left arm is draped over your pelvis or your upper thigh. Now, keeping the arm draped there, right? Like, it might slide a little bit, but it doesn't effectively roll off of your leg. A little bit, initiate now through the scapula, and initiate sliding the scapula forwards or away from the spine. Now, when you do that, the arm's going to come with it, right? So you're moving the shoulder complex forwards in space and then back to neutral. In that forwards backwards plane, when you're lying on your side like this, is usually not quite as big as that upward downward plane is, right? So now you're initiating with your scapula. Your arm's going to be impacted, and likely your head is going to be impacted. And you just see if you can track the scapula coming away from the spine, so that the space on the inside of the scapula, or the space between the inside of the scapula and the spine, gets bigger when the arm goes forwards, right? And then when you bring it back, that space relatively gets a little smaller. So if we had our clock, it would be 3 o'clock. Then take the scapula and slide it backwards. And when you do that, that inner edge of the scapula will go closer to the spine. That's it. And you may feel a sense that the arm very gently, a tiny bit, wants to turn or rotate. Yeah, but not a lot. It's not like it turns so that the palm goes up to the ceiling. But inside the humerus, the upper arm, you may have a sense that it turns a little bit. And that might relate to an invitation that you feel that your head might turn. So now go back and forth from 3 to 9 this way. So initiate with the scapula, and the arm, and possibly the trunk and the pelvis, and whatever else, the head may come along relatively, right? And you're sliding in a lazy way the scapula from a 3-ish to a 9-ish organization. And you sense what that does to the trunk, particularly to the middle ribs. And you notice that direction in your alligator brain sensing capacity compared to the up towards your head and down towards your pelvis direction that we just did. Is one of those directions somehow more familiar or less jerky than the other. That's it. And then rest your arm. And now begin to explore that with your pelvis. Now your femur's attached, so you're going to feel your leg move, but you're not purposefully initiating with your leg. So take your pelvis and slide it forwards. Yeah. So some part of your mind would call that roll, right? But if we don't call it roll, we say we're going to initiate by doing something that brings the left side of the pelvis forwards and then back to neutral, right? But of course, the pelvis and the femur are big, right? So as soon as you move one of them, the other one's going to be impacted. You can't move your pelvis and not move your femur. Try to do it. Try to just move your pelvis and don't move your femur at all. You'll feel all kinds of resistance. So it's fine, but what we're studying here is the initiation of action. And you come back and then begin to slide your pelvis back. So again, from the pelvis, we're thinking 3 and 9, but it's not the same pelvic clock as lying on your back. Yeah, so there comes inside of your mind that some sort of a description that says, oh, well, I might be rolling, right? But initiate from your pelvis. If the rest of you follows and you find yourself rolling, then that's what you're doing. But I want you to sense the pelvis going 3 to 9. That's it. Good. The feet stay together. The knees stay more or less together, even if the top leg slides. That's it. Okay, rest on your side and find out now, where do you rest on your side? See, your system will kind of come to some default place. When I say rest, do you find yourself sort of curling more forwards or tucking this way or that way, or flattening or arching? There's some deep place in the alligator brain when I say rest on your side that just goes there. So we know side lying is inherently asymmetrical. We know that the non-weight bearing side is more concave. The weight bearing side is more convex. How is that now compared to when you first lay down? Is the convex more convex? Are you flatter? Is the concave more concave or not? So now take both the shoulder and the pelvis together towards 3 o'clock. Now, if you think that, rather than I'm going to roll forwards. Now, you are going to roll forwards to do it, but think, that's it, beautiful. Think I'm going to initiate the action from my scapula and my pelvis. And because my humerus and my femur and the rest of my arm and leg and my head are attached, they're going to come along. So there's a way that you're rolling over your right side, but you're initiating it from this proximal part of you with your scapula and pelvis. That's it. And you come back and see if you can come back just to the center, right? You don't roll back. You just come to the center line of the clock. And then you roll forwards by initiating with sliding the scapula. That's it. And notice who wants to lead, scapula or pelvis. Can they go exactly together? Which probably means that one can move more than the other. So you decide by the one that moves less, not force the one to move more. That's beautiful. You come back to the rest, come back to rest on your side in the center. And now take both your scapula and your pelvis backwards. So this is a predictable kind of lesson, right? Like your mind is super intelligent. It understands like, oh, now we're going to do this, right? But this isn't about this sort of symmetry thing. It's about really noticing, does the system, and then come back to the center. So just from the center to back, both scapula and pelvis together. Feel, is somehow that more clearly connected to your head, to your legs, than going forwards, or was forwards more connected? See, if you have to like put the brakes on and decelerate yourself, that's just as much effort as the sort of effort that it takes from arresting inertia to initiate an action. Yeah. Go back and forth between the two. We call that rolling. But think about it and sense it as initiating from the proximal center of you. Scapula and pelvis going forwards together and scapula and pelvis going back. And notice when you do that, do you actually go up and down a little bit? At some point, does the concavity and convexity shift even a little bit through the action? The concavity and convexity of the middle ribs. Okay, rest in the center, wherever that is, which may be becoming a different place. Now, see if you can, it'll be a smaller range of motion than what you were just doing. See if you can bring the scapula, initiate from the scapula and pelvis always. Bring the scapula forwards and the pelvis back together at the same time, and find out what does your head do. And find out how it's like a washcloth maneuver, and come back to the center. It's like the top half of you is turning one way and the bottom half of you is turning the other way. So the middle has to lengthen somehow. So keep going with your scapula going forwards and your pelvis going back. So just that pattern. See, does your head go with your shoulders or with your pelvis? Because it could go either way, right? There's not a correct answer to that, but there's just a habitual answer to it. And then they both come back to the center. And if you be really honest with yourself, you'll find out that they both don't come back to the center, right? At the same time. One wants to lead and drag the other behind. Now switch it and take your scapula back and your pelvis forwards. So do the other half of that. That's it. But how can it happen from the scapula and pelvis without overarching your lumbar spine? It's not about pushing from your lumbar spine. It's about driving from that center there. That's nice. Does your head go with your pelvis or your shoulders? It looks beautiful, but just a reminder, but it looks beautiful for everybody. The arm is just soft and the leg is soft. This is really a lesson as if you were a baby that was about 3 to 6 months of age. You can't weight bear on your extremities yet. You don't really know what they are. You're trying to figure out what this worm-like center of yourself is. Okay, good. Now, rest on your side. And very slowly roll to your back. Take a full rest and observe what's curious now. Because this lesson we've initiated now the whole lesson through one side. And this is the type of lesson that can create a fairly significant difference in your inner sensation from one side to the other. Now, it doesn't have to, but people, it's kind of odd sometimes for people. It's like, whoa, I really feel like, I'm really heavy or longer, or wider, or thicker, or somehow through one side than I am through the other, or bigger. And very slowly roll your head from side to side like we did in the beginning, and just observe how that occurs. Which way do you go? To which side do you go first? And you go to both sides, but observe as your head goes to the left, what happens? Which side becomes concave? And as your head comes to the right, which side becomes concave in the trunk and which side becomes convex by a degree or two, right? It's not huge. It's a degree or two. See, as your head is going from side to side very slowly, can you sense if one leg lengthens a bit away from you and one leg a little bit slides up as the head rolls? So when the head goes left, which leg lengthens? When the head goes right, which leg lengthens? And if there's a habit, it might be that the same leg lengthens to both sides, even though your mind will say, well, if this is this way, then that has to be that way, but it might not be what you do. rest. Just observe your breath. Very gently roll onto your right side. Feel what you need under your head. Same side. So you're laying on the same side. Yep, same right side. There you go. And feel what you need under your head. Notice it may not be the same amount. So if a little is good, a lot is not better. Hand draped over your side, knees bent to about 90. Observe your contact and observe just your breath while you lie on in this asymmetrical position, right? The ground is a constraint and it's also an enabler, right? It's a constraint in the sense that it's there and we run into it with the right side, but it's an enabler to help sense how we respond, how responsive we are, and how we receive ground force back up, how we receive sort of the inner buoyancy from the center of the earth. Now, if we go up to that 12 and 6 that we did, so take both your scapula and your pelvis up in the direction of your ear, and then both of them down together, initiating from it's always initiating from scapula and pelvis in this lesson. It's not right or wrong, but it's what this lesson, it's a constraint of this lesson. And now, see what you can do. Rest in the middle. Could you begin to take the scapula up and the pelvis down? So they're going in opposite directions together at the same time, and feel what it does to the concavity convexity thing. So the scapula goes to 12 and the pelvis goes down to 6. And the right side has to be impacted by that, and then bring them back to the center and do it again. Feel how can you become more convex on the left side and concave on the right. But how can you do that without just forcing yourself to push, either pull or push up under the right side? How can you coordinate from the scapula and pelvis? And then go the other way, bring the scapula down and the pelvis up. So you're studying concavity and convexity, right? But you're not thinking about squeezing or stretching, and go in and out that way. So you're like a bellows or an accordion. So the scapula and pelvis go away from each other, which is opposite directions at the same time. And then they come towards each other, which is opposite directions at the same time. And how smooth can that happen with the arm free and the leg free and soft? Good. Now just notice, is it easier to coordinate these opposite directions in this plane, or go back to the rotational plane? Take your pelvis forwards and your scapula back. And then your scapula forwards and your pelvis back. Find out, is the forward backward plane more differentiable for you, or the up and down? That's it. Okay, good. Rest on your side. Now, like a connect the dots, right? So let's just think for a moment. You took your scapula up. Just do this in your inner imagination, your felt sense imagination. Just feel your scapula going up in your imagination, and then going forwards, and then going down, and then going back, and then going up. So if you connected those dots in a smooth, arcful way, it would make a circle. So take your scapula, which is going to bring your arm along, in a circle. Now you could go in the direction that I directed you, or you could go the other direction. Find out which way you go, but that's it. Beautiful. Initiate from the scapula. Now your pelvis and everything else is going to be impacted. But that's beautiful. See how smooth it can be and how round it can be. See, notice, where do you tend to want to flatten it? Where it's not so arc-like, but it's more like line-like or angular-like. Yeah, your head is free. Your pelvis is free. And feel how you can utilize the ground under your right side to enable this to be more smooth. Not necessarily bigger, but more refined and smooth. That's it. Good. Now, come to the other direction. Wherever you are, just go the other direction. And feel how your pelvis is cooperating or coordinating this action. Could you let your pelvis also move with your scapula? So you take your pelvis and your scapula together in the same direction. Whichever direction you're going, circle your scapula and your pelvis together so that it becomes some bigger action of your whole self, coordinated with both of them initiating. That's it. Nice. And you'll roll. Take both of them in the other direction. So if you're going clockwise, go counterclockwise, or vice versa. That's it. And so make sure that that one is not leading the other. Your scapula is not leading your pelvis, and your pelvis is not leading your scapula. They're leading together. Good. Stop and rest. So this is one of those lessons that your mind is very bright. It knows what the next thing is. Can you begin to take your scapula in a direction of a circle, whichever direction you choose, and have it happen smaller than what you were just doing? And now, can you begin to take your pelvis opposite to it? So when your pelvis is back, your shoulders forwards. When your shoulders up, your pelvis is down. So your scapula is circling in a clockwise direction, and your pelvis is circling in a counterclockwise, or vice versa. Yeah, it'll feel like pat your head and rub your stomach. And initially it'll be like, wow, how the heck do I do that? Feel how, that's it. And then you'll get confused, right? And you'll find like, oh, then now they're both going in the same way. So they can't be going in the same way. If the scapula is back, the pelvis is forward. So sometimes you can stop, restart it, and go again. Keep it small. When you do this opposite direction thing, it won't be nearly as big as when you take the synchronous movement. There you go. So you can see where this could be a future study moment. That's it. And you find out how you have to use the ground under your right side. And you also begin to observe the places in the middle of you where it's not so easy to coordinate the extremities. Okay, good. Rest for a second. Come to your back and rest completely. Let your arms and legs down long. Notice the spaces between your sides and your elbows. Notice the breath. And sense if there's any more clarity of the shape of your rib cage and your shoulder blades and your collarbones. And if there is it the weight-bearing side that's more clear, or the side you were initiating movement? Is it the right side or the left side? Now, part of the completion of this lesson is that tonight, before you go to sleep, is that you take 10 minutes or so, 10 or 15 minutes, and you can lay in bed, it's fine. Or if you want to lay on the floor before you go to bed, that's fine too, either way. But take 10 to 15 minutes and lay on the left side, sorry, yawning, lay on the left side and explore these movements initiating through the right side. So in other words, you're going to recreate as much of the lesson as you remember laying on the other side. So basically we explored up and down separately with the scapula and the pelvis. We explored forward and back separately with the pelvis and scapula. We explored those directions together in the same direction, both up, both down. Then we explored one up, one down, the other up, the other down, right? Which meant the feeling of them coming together and going apart. We put them together into a circle, together in the same direction and opposite. So, but I want you to leave this lesson having only initiated this action through one side, because it's distinctive usually. And it's important to allow your nervous system to have the time to feel what happens. It'll begin to coordinate the action and transfer the learning, so that before you go to sleep tonight, you'll already have done part of the lesson in your subconscious. And then you can notice what's different. So slowly roll your head from side to side just to compare that in comparison to the beginning. And then rest. Observe your breath. So you can notice how this kind of a lesson would have an impact on any of the other lessons that we've already done, all of this tipping and tilting of the trunk and the shoulders and the pelvis, and how it would have to have some sort of an impact on the availability of your ribs when you breathe. So roll to your side, bring yourself up to standing. Take a moment to sense what happens as you come up into gravity. So in the beginning, we noticed that there's the footprint that you make with the ground, but there's always this relational understanding that happens through the ground and through the sky, and this sort of availability that we had with this little bit of a baby squat movement that we did, right? This sort of buoyant factor, just a little bit. You soften the ankles, the knees, the hips, and you just feel how that happens now. Can you feel that more through your trunk, your pelvis, your shoulders? And can there be less tension in any of those places that there may have been before? And come back to just stand. Very gently, we tested also this reference movement in the beginning of just shifting your weight towards one side and just observe. As you go over there, what do you do in your trunk? Do you turn? Do you tip? Do you fall? It's not right or wrong to get longer or shorter, just observe. Is it done in coordination to the whole, or is it excessive? You can go to the other side. You can notice how you probably shift your weight differently to the right than to the left. Maybe you turn more forwards or backwards to one side. And then if you begin to walk, how does the standing in place weight shift transfer to the walking, which is essentially shifting your weight while moving? Good. So tonight before you sleep, play with this movement lying on your right side and see what interesting shows up in your nervous system for the differences. And that'll be it for tonight's lesson, and I'll see you next week. Good night.